what we will plan to do first is kind of cover some of the nuts and bolts of Turnitin. Talk about how to create assignments, enroll students, and then look at the originality reports, what Turnitin can actually return to you. And from there, we might talk about some of the limitations of Turnitin that you'll come across, as well as some of the best practices of implementing Turnitin in your classrooms. What Turnitin is capable of doing is letting you enroll students from your class into the Turnitin website, and then the students can submit assignments to the Turnitin database. And then what Turnitin does is compare those papers to documents that are already in its repository. And with that, it returns an originality report. There's a percentage that shows how much of the text from this submission match what was already in the Turnitin database, and it highlights strings of text that match. 330 plus million student papers that have been submitted to this system over the last several years. Scholarly titles, there are more than 120,000 that are part of that, and that's going to include a lot of scholarly papers from EBSCO, Gale, the major scholarly publishers. And then finally the digital content there, especially I think when you're talking about the undergraduate level, a lot of the potential plagiarism that we might see is coming from web content. And so we're looking at 45 plus billion current and archived web pages that Turnitin has as part of their database. You'll use your TTU email address to log in. There's a nice big green button there that says add class. The class type that you want to create, it defaults to a standard class. The difference between a standard class and a master class is that with a master class you can have several different sections. If you have 30 different sections of maybe that freshman level biology or chemistry, you can create one master class with all of the assignments that everyone is doing. Turnitin asks you to give a class name and an enrollment password. The enrollment password is important because that is what you'll give students to actually enroll in your class on the website. I've created a class here that I thought we would look at together, dummy class, Beekeeping 101. When you're looking at your instructor dashboard, it's listed here as, there's a class ID number, and then here's the course name. It's showing up as active. So I'm going to go ahead and select that course. There's an option here to add an assignment. When you click the green button here, you have 4 options for different types of assignments that you can create within Turnitin. The default is the paper assignment, and that's what most people will want to use. The peer mark assignment, this is if you wanted to redistribute the papers that students submitted amongst the students. There's also a revision assignment, and the revision assignment can be nice if you want students to submit multiple drafts. If perhaps there's a term paper that students will be working on kind of throughout the semester, there are options here where you can have them submit multiple drafts, and through that, the documents that they submit earlier in the semester wouldn't be entered into the Turnitin database. So that way, at the end of the semester, you wouldn't get a 100% match. And then finally, there's also a reflection assignment option. Now, the reflection assignment doesn't actually provide an originality report. It doesn't compare what students have submitted to what's in the Turnitin database. Looking at a paper assignment, you'll be asked to create an assignment title. So something descriptive that you can replicate on a syllabus. We do have a start date. So that is when students will be able to start submitting their assignments. And we also have a due date, and you can choose as the instructor whether you want students to be able to submit assignments after the due date or not. And then the last option there is the post date, because that's when students can start seeing the grades and the comments that you as the instructor have left on their papers. That's also if you wanted the originality reports to be available to the students for viewing, you would also want to pay attention to that post date then. One of the more important options here, generate originality reports for student submissions. Immediately the first report is final. That means that when students submit their document, right away the system will run that originality report and return to the student and to you as the instructor that originality index. Now, there's another option right below that where students can view the originality report and then they can resubmit. So they're able to submit multiple drafts before before that due date. The important thing is actually what's in parentheses here where it says can overwrite reports until the due date. When a student submits draft 1 and then they view that originality report and then make another submission, that second submission is going to overwrite the initial draft, the initial report. So if you as the instructor needed to see kind of those different iterations, that might be something that you'd want to consider, whether or not you want the students to be able to submit multiple drafts. Now, the third option there on the due date, so neither the students nor the instructor will see the originality index until the due date. There are a few other options. Basically, there are filters for the report, whether you want to exclude bibliographic materials, citations, if you want to exclude quoted materials, small matches. So, for example, if you wanted to exclude some of the small matches, you might say anything that's fewer than 5 words, I don't want to see highlighted. And then whether or not you want the students to be able to see the originality reports. Now, I would advocate that as an instructor, it would be advantageous to let the students go ahead and see those originality reports so that it is a learning tool where they can see, okay, here's where I made a mistake, here's where my paraphrase wasn't very clear. The next one, whether or not you want to submit the papers to the student paper repository. Now, here, if you submit them to the standard paper repository, anything that your students upload will become part of that 330 million plus student paper database that's part of Turnitin. If you wanted students to do revisions of a paper, that's where you might not want to have that first draft added to the repository, so that subsequent drafts would kind of have that fresh start and not be compared to a previous submission. The number one question I think that I get as a Turnitin administrator is what is the percentage that I'm looking for to know whether there's a problem, whether it's been plagiarized? And the hard answer is that there's not a magic number. Unfortunately, Turnitin can't really have that human expertise to evaluate whether plagiarism has happened or even really whether the sources have been cited appropriately. However, those numbers can be pretty helpful. Here at the top we have a 0% match. Coming up as blue, we have 8 and 11%, and then as you start to get to these higher percentage matches, you'll see red, orange, kind of a caution, so that you as the instructor can then open up the originality report to see where the problem happened. Here's what the originality report will look like. We've got the paper that was originally submitted, Beekeeping for Beginners, and then, like I said, we've got a series of numbered, color-coded matches that are coming up here on the right. If you click on any of these matches, you can see where the matching text happened in the context of that original source. So again, that can help you kind of determine whether this was a bad paraphrase, whether it was an outright just copy and paste. And then over on the right-hand side, there's a little bit more information about the website where that content came from. If you're using this to actually return comments and grades, feedback to your students, you can create a comment. So if I wanted to say on the paragraph 1 here, we need a citation there. And then the student, when they view this report, they would be able to hover over these bubbles and say, see some of the comments, or you can even add things like grammar corrections. You can create frequently used comments. The file types that are accepted by Turnitin, they need to be text-based. So things like images, of course, Turnitin isn't going to be able to compare anything. It needs to be either RTF, rich text file, a doc, like Microsoft Word, doc or docx. You can also submit just simple text file. If you used a scanned PDF, then you would need to have the OCR, the character recognition done. I think there are more than 30 languages that are, and we do have that feature turned on our account, so you can do multiple languages too. Probably the biggest limitation of Turnitin is that it won't catch any plagiarized text that's outside of the Turnitin database. If a student uses something from a book that was written in 1933 and there's only 5 copies in the world, Turnitin probably doesn't have it indexed in its database. It might not catch that. It also doesn't distinguish very well between cited text, properly cited text, and plagiarized text. So we looked at that example where we wanted to exclude quotes or exclude the bibliography from the report. It could be possible that you would get a high similarity index, but they were just false positives. The student actually put quotations around that matching text or did properly cite the text. And Turnitin also doesn't catch paraphrase text very well, so if the student has done a good job of kind of rearranging those words just enough to avoid detection, Turnitin wouldn't catch that, and it wouldn't catch any made-up facts or false citations. It doesn't evaluate how well sources have been used. That human expertise is very important here. It doesn't determine whether the sources were appropriate for the assignment. So it wouldn't be able to look and see, okay, 5 citations for Wikipedia, that is just not going to cut it for college level writing. Turnitin wouldn't be able to make that determination. Think about the types of assignments that you're giving your students in your classes. Are you assigning lab reports, critical essays, a typical research paper, bibliographies, something more like a grant or research proposal? And what could the originality report tell you about your students' writing in the context of that assignment? And also think about how could the originality report being viewed by the student, how could that enhance their writing? And let's also talk about what false positives you might see in that type of a paper.
We actually use it in our research papers, in our research class, and they had a final paper submission, and I went through and opened up some draft submissions so that they could catch self-correct some of those because they're just learning to paraphrase. So they could start to kind of self-correct those instances where they're kind of getting how to paraphrase but they didn't quite get it, and start to edit their own papers versus just turning it in at the end of the term and failing because of plagiarism, because they didn't really get the skill of paraphrasing yet.
I know you say books are not often in the database. What about referee journal articles?
Yes, right. That number that was at the beginning of about 120,000 titles, there are a lot of referee journals, especially those that have been published more recently. So I know a lot of, like for example with the library, our electronic access to a lot of the scholarly titles goes back to about 1997 or 1998. What are some false positives that you might see on an originality report for your field? Yes?
Some of the work that we hand our students, we ask them to draw from examples via the text. So sometimes they'll paraphrase, but sometimes I think we allow them 5% of the entire paper can be in quotation, a direct quote. And I can definitely see my direct quotes, even if they just cite the paper saying, the title of the paper was insert paper title. I feel like my bibliography, any in-text citation is probably going to get a large percentage taken off.
One of the things you might consider is setting up a dummy assignment where the students can just upload a paper, maybe at the beginning of the semester, and see what that originality index looks like if they've just copied things from Wikipedia. Creating trust in the classroom, maybe having a statement on your syllabus that you'll be using Turnitin in the course, using Turnitin equally, having all students submit all of their work to the repository. It's not making some students feel singled out.
There's an option on Blackboard to link the Turnitin.
To make sure that Blackboard was turned on for your particular course. So if you open the course like I did, scroll down a little bit to Course Tools and Turnitin Assignments. There's an option under Assessments to use either a Turnitin assignment or a Turnitin direct assignment. And the difference isn't too significant. If you use a Turnitin assignment or a Turnitin basic assignment, what's going to happen is within Blackboard, when you and your students are working on that assignment, basically it's loading the Turnitin web page here within Blackboard. And so all of the same functionality is there, like grade mark, the originality reports, of course, you can do the peer mark. With the Turnitin direct assignment, it's a lot more seamlessly integrated with Blackboard.